Hello, everybody. Christian Peverelli here. I am the founder and CEO of WeAreNoCode, and today I have a very, 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 very special guest.
That's a little very.
Absolutely. I would like to introduce everyone here to Christine Outram. She was actually a student of mine at Startup Boost, went through the Startup Boost program when I was running the accelerator. She has an incredible backstory. She was the inventor of the Copenhagen Wheel, which was an electric bike that won the top innovation of the year for Times Magazine. She's since founded several companies. She's been chief product officer. She's been head of product. She's been VP invention director, which I don't even know what that means, but for a company called Dutch. And she just has a background. She started off in MIT. She has so many skills. I can't even start to describe how intelligent this woman is. She, is also an amazing person. And I'm just so excited because she's also a no-coder who didn't even really know that she was a no-coder. So Christine, without much more to do, thank you so much for joining us for this episode. I'm so excited to bring your story to the fans.
I'm excited too, because I feel like there's been, I don't know, for 10 years now, I've been just trying to get things done, but I don't have a coding background. And I'm very excited for this movement that allows people to kind of build things quickly. And yeah, it's always been something that I'm very close to, getting things done.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I am as well, as you can see.
Yeah.
So first of all, you are the CEO now of a company called Everydae. Why don't you tell us about Everydae? And then we're going to jump into, that's going to segue us into the future of education.
Yeah, so we're an online learning company. The premise is that most high school students need help getting from 9th to 12th grade and then up into college or career. But the problem is that tutoring is prohibitively expensive. So only 15% of families can actually afford an in-person tutor today. So with Everydae, you can ace your classes and prepare for college through fun 10-minute micro lessons that you do online, and they adapt based on your needs and goals. So whereas a tutor might cost $75 per hour and up, Everydae starts at $19 a month. And it's all about just preparing a little bit every day, which is a much better way to study and a much better way to learn.
That's awesome. And so you mentioned a quote when we were talking in the back office here, that basically you had a mother be like, I can't believe that my daughter loves to learn.
Yeah, she's like, she actually enjoys studying with Everydae. And we're like, that is possibly the best referral ever. Yeah. So
yeah, it's kind of like a backhanded compliment. It's like, why are you surprised? I told you this was great.
Yeah, exactly. This is a little bit of a backhanded compliment. Yeah.
So how do you adapt to these different students and their needs? You said that there's this process which kind of like adapts the teaching to the way that people are. Is it to the way that people are learning, or the way that or the mistakes they're making?
So, I mean, adaptivity as a concept in education has been talked about since, definitely since the early 80s. It's kind of been in the lab. People have talked about how you can assess a student's strengths and weaknesses and then, give them content that is exactly what they need to see in order to level up. What we're trying to get to is give you something that has a 70% chance of you getting it correct, because it's hard enough to stretch you, but it's not so hard that you want to quit. So you want to keep people kind of in this ideal learning mode. We're still in the very early stages of adaptivity. Students right now come and they give us a little bit of information about themselves. Have they taken this test? What their kind of previous scores were, when they're going to take their next test, because that also creates an adaptive study journey as well. And so from that, we create what we call kind of a baseline study journey. And then because everything is tagged and we're kind of looking on the back end at all the data of all the students that are answering all the questions, we can start to then assess difficulty and give people the right things in the right order.
I love that and the reason why I love that is because you're not going out and saying, hey, we're in AI, we're in machine learning, we're artificial intelligence, although that's exactly what you're kind of doing. But you understand that you need a good amount of data to be able to do that. So instead of starting off the company by saying, or an AI, a machine learning powered learning system, you are basically focused on helping the improvements and then gathering the data on which you'll be able to build those models. So
That's
I find that
100%
incredibly,
correct.
that is so humble of you, because everyone in the tech scene is like trying to talk about their cutting edge new platforms before they even have data sets to be able to create adaptive models.
Yeah, and I mean, we were lucky because most of us worked at a previous company called Veritas Prep, which was around for a very long time and sold in 2018. But while we were there, we'd kind of worked on some of this adaptive foundations. And so we actually, when the company was sold, we kept that technology, and that's been kind of, you know, the base of spitting out at this new company Everydae. But it's still just the base. And as you said, like without data and without kind of a large amount of students answering questions and kind of getting that baseline data, we can't actually build that adaptivity. So I think about us as in phase one, and then, you know, over the next couple of years or so, we'll be more and more adaptive. And that's the beauty of the system. The more data you have, the more adaptive you can be, the better it gets, the more fine-tuned it is, and then it just ultimately gets better and better every day. So yeah.
That's great. No, I love that, because I think that students basically like, this is an interesting thing I think that every person can relate to. Sometimes the way that someone is teaching you something is a different way that the way that you're comfortable learning things, because I guess people learn different. And for me, for example, like I've learned a bunch of languages, but I'm terrible at learning languages from textbooks or from classes. For me, it's always been about immersing myself in those cultures and learning that way. And other people are so good at learning from textbooks and from classes. And so I think that in that same way, like this idea of one size fits all in the learning industry is going to be moving more towards what you're describing right now. Would you say that's like part of what the future of education is going to be?
Yeah, partly it's about learning styles, but I think it's also something around something that humans do very well. A human tutor, if they're very good, and a lot of tutors aren't that good, but if a human tutor is good, they're able to pinpoint your weaknesses and blind spots. And then they're able to create targeted interventions based on what knowledge you might be missing. So, you know, I remember when I was 8 years old and I got sick and I had to go to the hospital, and I missed this fundamental week in our math class. And I came back and I suddenly didn't have this concept that I needed, and I was behind. And then I told myself I was not good at math, and then, you know, kind of it snowballs into other things. If we can catch that early and create a targeted intervention to be like, you know what, you're actually missing the foundations of algebra in this way. Let's kind of come back and serve you that, so that then you have that base, and then we can build on that afterwards. So I think it's about that too, not just the learning styles, but also where are your blind spots and how do we help you fix those?
That's a great example, because I think that example is the typical example everyone gives you. I'm not good at math. And it usually comes, and math is that kind of thing where it's like you kind of you know, some people will be better to begin with, have a mind which is more adapted to math. But I'm a big believer that everyone can learn math, and so even if it takes a little bit more effort for some people, but I think that what you're saying is so true. As soon as you alienate yourself from the belief that you can learn this thing because you've maybe fallen back, you haven't taken that one class, the more that you're encouraged to create a belief system in yourself that says, that basically repeats that same limitation all the time, instead of being like, maybe I just have to dig into this and like put in a little bit more effort or find my blind spot. And I love that. Wow, that's so powerful.
So if we can use computing to find the blind spot, we could do those targeted interventions and not just have kind of a one size fits all. Oh, you've seen this once, now let's move on to the next concept. No, maybe you didn't get that concept. Maybe you need to go back to it and, you know, really solidify it before you can move to something else. So yeah.
Love that. No, that's very, very powerful. So are there any other trends you see in terms of the direction that education is taking? I mean, right now, right, we're all locked at home with COVID. Not that we have COVID, but, you know, with the situation with COVID.
Thankfully, yes.
So are there some things that you're seeing, you know, obviously work from home, online? What are some of the trends that you believe will have an influence in this industry?
Yeah, so I just wrote a piece actually on whether distance learning is here to stay. And I think it's a very interesting question. You know, I think at the adult level, absolutely. I think when you have self-motivated individuals who are working on their own time and already at a level where they can, you know, work for themselves, we're going to see essentially in-person classes. You know, I just don't think they're going to come back. You know, most people take their courses online. It was already headed in that direction. But then for us, we also look at all the way down through to the K through 8 market. And there, you know, you have students who they
What
need...
is that, the K through 8?
K through 8, kindergarten through 8th grade.
Oh, yeah. Cool.
So we're in high school. We focus on high school, so 9 through 12, and then the K through 8 market. You know, there you still need, students need handholding there. You're not going to have a fully online asynchronous, you know, engagement with a 6-year-old. They, you know, they need that kind of handholding and that structure, and they need those classes. And so, you know, we've been thinking about distance education as a hybrid. How do we have the accountability of a human, but also make that a human experience? But then also, how do you supplement that with online tools that don't need a human, but can actually help people at scale as well?
Love that.
So,
I really love that. I love that distinction, because for me, it's like, well, first of all, education starts at home, full stop. But after that, I think that it's really important in the earlier days, up to about 18, to bring people into this sort of generalist learning, where they can explore the areas that they're interested in and not. But yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of kind of the international baccalaureate and the you know, these modules, which essentially say, we're going to teach you how to learn. We're not just going to teach you how to repeat things or how to do specific things. We're going to teach you how to think for yourself. And I think that it's a great distinction that you make there in terms of like earlier years and later years, because I do think that there's a point at which at first there definitely has to be that kind of education. But then after that, it's kind of like you can pinpoint a little bit more the areas in which you want to get more specialized in. And so I think that like higher ed, is that what it's called? Higher ed, like university and more, is going to be influenced in a very different way than earlier on, right?
I think so too. I think, again, you know, kind of talking about identifying the foundations or the blind spots. There are foundations that every student needs, and that's what we should be learning when we're younger. But then we can start to explore and build on those. And like, this has got a weird parallel, actually, I think, with, you know, no coding, because it's about setting yourself a goal and then just figuring out how to get there when you don't necessarily have all the skills and you don't have the time to go and do a 4-year course on, you know,
learning how to code.
Learning how to code.
And there's one definition of no code, which is basically that it's just a way to solve a problem that could be written in code, but using more visual interfaces to be able to solve that problem. Or in some cases, not building it through sort of software at all. But no, that's incredible. I think that's an interesting parallel, actually. I mean, you know, for us, we usually are working with people who are above 18, and so we're definitely big believers of the online model, especially when we talk about sort of bringing like becoming an entrepreneur or building companies. Like there is this interesting thing where people need a lot of support on one hand, and at the same time they also need to be able to be sort of self-motivated to a certain extent, right? Because that's the nature of the beast when we talk about entrepreneurship. Very cool. So I love that article. You're gonna have to send it to me or post it underneath this interview so that people can go and check it out. So now let's transition. Now that you've made this parallel, let's transition and talk a little bit about no code, because you're one of those people who basically has been playing around, building things, not really understanding that these were no code tools necessarily, but have always been found a way to creatively solve problems. And if I'm correct, lately you've kind of gotten into building software with no code tools. So tell us about that experience. Like how, you know, what was, first of all, why did you do it? And second of all, what did it feel like that moment when you realized like, wow, I can do this myself?
Yeah. So, I mean, I've always been interested in business, and I guess starting my own business. And so ever since I was young, had ideas that I wanted to execute on. And often they just stayed as ideas. And I remember I read, gosh, it was probably 10, 12 years ago now. I read The 4-Hour Workweek. And,
Tim Ferriss.
Tim Ferriss. And if you've ever read that, he says, kind of, if you're starting a business, just put a website up there and, have it as a one-page website and a landing page. And here's where you go to kind of create this landing page, and then test whether people are going to come to it. And if they don't, then move on to the next business idea. And so that was kind of, I think, my first introduction to let's build something quickly and test it, but that I didn't need to be, I didn't need to have a degree in engineering, in software engineering to do that. So just started iteratively. And I think one of the biggest kind of commonalities in a lot of early founders is that we're curious people who want to solve problems, and we will tinker. So, I think you have to have that mentality where, oh, I want to hook this up to Facebook. How do I do that? Let me Google it. Let me find it out. Let me read a forum. Great. Somebody did it this way. Kind of you're a gatherer of information, and then, you execute on top of that. And so that's just kind of been my mode, is I forage for information, and without even realizing that this was kind of a no-code technique, to string together the entire experience that I wanted to build. More recently, that. I mean, yeah, go for it.
No, I was just going to say that it sounds like it all ties together also with like this idea of education, and also driven by curiosity, right?
Definitely. Yeah. I mean, it's just a DIY kind of ethic is something that I've always had. I think it comes from my dad. I mean, some people are amazing at getting other people to do stuff for them. Other people want to just kind of figure it out themselves before they get other people to do stuff for them. I'm one of those kind of, I want to figure it out. So give me a problem and I'll, it adds tools to my
honestly
toolkit.
That's often the best way, because I mean, even if you're going to hand off the reins of that at some point, it's important to understand what you want someone else to do and understand the limitations, and because that can also create a great amount of empathy that can make you a much better leader when you kind of like have conversations and just be more informed about that area. So that's why entrepreneurs, you're essentially a very different, let's call it a beast, than a corporate employee, in the sense that you have to be such a generalist, and you also have to understand that a lot of these things at first you might have to learn and execute yourself, and eventually you'll have to put in someone who's better than you.
Yes.
And so it sounds like you're using that
transition too. You can to let go of stuff that you've worked on, and I think that's what I'm balancing right now, is how much in the weeds I should be for how long before we actually, move me onto something else and get someone else to take that over.
There's actually a great, I listened to a podcast the other day where Steve Blank just talks about the fact that, and this is something that's not really talked about in the startup ecosystem, but basically there's a point at which you reach product market fit, and you're ready to grow, where all of the things that you've been doing up to then, all the tinkering, all the figuring out of these small little things, all those skills become almost irrelevant. And a whole new set of skills of setting up processes, hiring, training, become necessary. And so it's very difficult oftentimes for founders to kind of like step from that, I'm tinkering, I'm figuring stuff out myself, I'm doing everything myself, to, okay, now we're talking about this at a much larger level, and I need to take a step even further back and learn a bunch of new skills, which I didn't know, which might be management, they might be setting up processes. And so, and that was super interesting to me, because people don't really realize that, and VCs never tell you, but almost as soon as a VC is putting money into your company, a venture capital firm is putting money into your company, they're going on the basis that, okay, great, this founder now needs to completely change all the things that he's been doing till now, because now we're going to growth. Because as you and me know, you only really raise capital once you have some traction and revenue.
Yeah, no, it's true. And I think that's why a lot of founders get replaced in their company too, because it's difficult for them to make the transition from DIY to kind of, management.
So do you think, I have this question, I'd love to know what you think. Do you think that's like an ego thing where like we want to attach ourselves to like, oh, you know, like we have a hard time detaching? Is it like that we have a fixed mentality where we're like, oh, but I don't know how to do that stuff. I don't, you know, and instead of leaning into the learning experience, you just kind of try to defend what you currently know?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of ego in there. But I also think that a lot of founders, I mean, there's a myth, I guess, that most founders are in their 20s and, you know, just dropped out of school or something and started their business. But I would say, as someone in my 40s now, that I've had experience both on the kind of, yeah, I've had experience both on the small, scrappy startup side, but also the large corporate business side. And having a career where I've had both of those experiences, I would hope that it would lend itself to being able to make that transition because you understand the bigger processes of a business. But I think sometimes when you're, you know, in your 20s and you start a business and you're doing everything for yourself, you've never seen the context of how a larger operation runs. And so I think that can be kind of a scary transition to make. And it's why often I think VCs want to bring somebody else in from the outside who's had that experience at scale. But yeah, it is tough for founders to have a boss when they haven't had one or when they've been the CEO of their own company. So yeah.
Very cool. So what are some of the next steps that you're planning to take with Everydae?
Yeah, so the big things for us are, you know, kind of figuring out our marketing channels and then expanding our academic courses and content. And the marketing channels, you know, this is where we're completely in the no-code camp. So our head of engineering actually came to me and said, have you heard of this thing called Webflow? I think it would be awesome if we built all of our marketing pages in Webflow because our time as engineers is super precious and we should really be working on some of the adaptivity and, you know, kind of the backbone of the actual system and making sure that students have an amazing experience. And, you know, you guys are going to be changing all the copy and the value propositions and doing all these tests. What if we made all of our kind of marketing pages, landing pages, and everything through Webflow? And initially, honestly, I was a little bit hesitant. I was like, oh, that seems like more work for me. I've got a lot of stuff to do because I usually take on all the design stuff. And I mean, I've used a lot of drag and drop website builders over the years. So I've used Weebly, I've used Wix, I've used all
Squarespace.
Squarespace, or, you know, WordPress, all the open source solutions. And I always found them frustrating because there wasn't enough, I couldn't fine tune them enough. They were good enough, but they were never able to kind of take that next step to really execute on the vision that I had in my head. But started thinking about it and thinking about that, you know, where should we put our resources and where should we put our money? And, you know, got a trial of Webflow and started playing with it and was just blown away. Yeah, I mean, I just really, there's kinks in it. We're having some issues with it, to be honest, and it is taking a little bit of our engineering time to connect back with our APIs and, you know, do a lot of kind of the sophisticated tracking we want to do. But yeah, it's so quick for me to put something up and test it. You know, I just started 2 new Facebook campaigns yesterday that are going to their own unique landing pages so that we can test things. And yeah, I think it's probably just speed to learning.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the no-code tools that we also really enjoy. Like every no-code tool, it really has its limitations. I always say that like every specific solution you're trying to develop has a different stack. And so thinking that like you have to find the tool is not always the approach. It's more about understanding like what are the you know, what are the different things that you require within your tech. You know, with Webflow, some of the limitations and some of the direction that they are taking is to move into these kind of web apps and eventually mobile apps as well. I know that Vlad's talked about it. But I think that, yeah, you know, it's such a great way to get people started. Specifically, I think to get people excited about the ability that they have to take the reins a little bit and to believe in themselves almost. It's kind of like, you know, one of the things that I understand in my business is that getting people to be excited about what they're doing in terms of learning no code, it really, in this world, which is incredibly sort of dopamine fueled, right? So it's kind of like everyone needs to get that like feedback of like, you're doing a great job, here's a pat on the back. And I feel like we always start people off on more simple no-code tools so they can sort of get that feeling of like, oh, wow, I can actually do this. And then you slowly bring them into the deeper and deeper waters of the complexities and how deep you want to go of building with no-code. Because if not, you just lose them. If you throw them in the deep end, and that's what I think a lot of people end up doing. It's like they go out there and just like no-code, I want to learn no-code. And then they go on a website and it's like a 4-hour video showing you how to build Airbnb. And it's intimidating, frankly. If we want to bring people in this space who are not from this space, we have to be inclusive. We have to break it down. We have to stop alienating people because they don't have experience in the tech world. And we have to stop acting like this lingo that we use is super complex, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I'm a big endorser of, is like, hey, like, this is a huge empowering tool. And I think that what you've been building as well, it has the same effect on people, right? And that's where you really...
You've touched on something really fundamental, which is about this sense of progress. And, that's it, right? Like when you throw me into a 4-hour Let's Build Airbnb, I'm not at that 70% perfect, this is challenging me just enough, but it's not so hard that I want to quit. Like it has to be at the level that you're at, and then you can scaffold and build on it.
That is a great quote, what you just said. Can you repeat that? Where it's like,
what did I say again?
No, so it's about like, like you're excited enough, but then like not too overwhelmed, so you want to quit.
Yeah, so that. I mean, it's about that kind of perfect amount of difficulty, because you want to be stretched. If it's too easy, you're going to quit. If it's too hard, you're going to quit. But if you get it just right, then you can keep on learning and keep on scaffolding and keep on building, and that's how you ultimately become better at what you do. So
amen. Love that.
Yeah.
So let's take a step back now. All these things are so exciting to talk about, but you now at this point have so much experience, both as I would call you an entrepreneur and an intrapreneur, because I feel like the roles that you've held inside of corporate settings have been to innovate, have been to to lead product. What would be some advice that you would have both for two kind of categories? One would be the aspiring entrepreneur who maybe is starting off his business right now. The other one is this person who's in the corporate setting, always had dreams of becoming an entrepreneur, but never really, they get stuck in analysis paralysis. They're scared. They think they have to quit their full-time job to do this. What would be like some advice to both those individuals from your own experience?
Yeah, so I think, this is kind of pretty common advice, but it's definitely a mistake that I've made, which is over-architecting the solution before really knowing whether there was any demand to something. And so I see this, I have friends who are still in corporate world who will contact me and say, hey, I've got this great idea for an app. Can we talk about it? Because I'm thinking about fundraising for it. And often it's a beautiful deck and a beautiful idea, but there's no proof yet. And yeah, it's how quickly, I often think that we need to shift from, and this goes for entrepreneurs who are already doing a business as well as people in corporate. We need to shift the mindset from I have an idea to I have an hypothesis. And I think this is what's going to happen when I do X. And it's like, well, how fast can I prove that or disprove it?
Yeah.
Because otherwise you get stuck on the idea. You get stuck on the kind of finished product in your head versus what is the thing I have a hunch about. If you have a hunch that millennial moms don't want to buy new baby clothes, but they actually want to rent them from other moms who no longer need them, that's not a product, that's a hunch, that's a hypothesis. So, what is that? How are you going to prove that? How are you going to kind of find that out before you even sketch or draw anything? I'm a designer, so I love to get in sketch. I love to kind of design things. I'm constantly thinking about the end product, but I've had to unlearn that. I had to not not just kind of go
Yeah,
into
definitely
design
preaching
world.
to the choir here. That's exactly what I tell the founders that I train. I also tell them, like, if you have an idea, it's better to test that in the market and find out that it doesn't really have market demand in a short amount of time, than to kind of chase this thing for 3 years, spend all your savings in developers. And so I think the general approach that people have, as you mentioned, that is like, I have an idea, I'm going to go out and build it. I need a fundraise to build because I don't have the money to pay developers. That's 3 levels of mistakes right there.
Yeah, and
With
I am not immune to this. I'm definitely,
No, and none of us are. Like, that's
Yeah.
what you want to do. So I
Yeah.
think that, like,
That's a sexy, exciting part, to be like, oh, what does my app look like? It's in the App Store, but that's not a business.
yeah, or like talk about your logo for like 3 weeks before you even like get moving, when the reality is that, like, people are not going to be downloading, buying, or whatever it is, the action that you're trying to get them to do, because your logo looks like this or looks like that. There might be a general aesthetic that people are more attracted to than other, but definitely a lot of the things that people think are important, like setting up the legal entity, getting all the paperwork perfect, before even testing out the market demand, what people are saying about it. So no code is very powerful, but if it's not within the context of a specific end, and if it's not including other people, you're basically just building something for yourself. And that's a mistake when you're trying to build a business, right?
Yeah.
Love that. So what other things have you learned, the easy way, the hard way in your career as an entrepreneur, that you'd love for other founders not to make in terms of mistakes?
To make those mistakes. Yeah, falling in too in love with your idea. That's, that's where, if we can have this shift from I have an idea to I have a hypothesis, then it's just much more freeing. You're like, okay, cool. A hypothesis is just something, to go test. Great.
Oh, wow. Love that. That brings you to the human element, where it's like, if it's an idea, you don't want to feel like you have a bad idea. As soon as you frame it as a hypothesis, because we take that as central to our identity, right? I have a bad idea. Oh, well, I'm dumb, right? Whereas a hypothesis is like, it basically has the connotation that we're doing a test. Yeah. And I think that, oh my God, love that. It really brings it. That's why I always say there's such a deep link between human psychology and entrepreneurship, because understanding yourself is what, and kind of changing your mind, or the way that you're framing things in your mind, will allow you to either feel free and be excited about it, or feel stuck and limited.
Yeah, I definitely believe that. And that's part of the whole kind of growth mindset movement in education as well, how we can get out of some of the mental models that we have, so to free ourselves from those constrictions. Yeah. But yeah, I think, one of the other kind of big things that a journey and things that I'm learning right now is around the fundraising process, and even around the way that you conceptualize your business. I think, back in the 80s, everybody wanted to be on Wall Street, right? Like, that was the big thing to go do. Now it's start a startup. And startup in, I think, people's heads often means VC, hypergrowth, next big thing. It's kind of a glorified story right now.
Absolutely.
But I'm loving this kind of counter movement, which is not being a startup founder, but actually just being a business owner. Businesses are startups, but you don't have to be $1 billion company. You can be just building a business.
Yeah, and I think people
startup, but it can be sometimes freeing to be like, I'm building a business. I'm a business person. I don't have to be like a startup entrepreneur who is on this kind of single track to VC and growth. There are other alternative funding methods out there right now. It's about sustainability, and if you're interested in business, it's about how do you get profit in the door, and that's not all the glorified stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely like a shift that has to happen. I think that's a bit of an epidemic, this idea that everyone needs to be VC backed, when the reality is that most companies that go that route fail. Like, not most, like a huge majority. And so VC will continue to fund certain things, and I think that they definitely have a space in this ecosystem, 100%. And they always will. But at the same time, I think it's important for people to kind of restructure their thoughts. People usually get into entrepreneurship because they're like, I want to work on my own terms. I don't want a boss. I want to work, like if you go the VC route, if you go the investor route altogether, like you will be accountable to someone, you will have a boss. And so I think that I'm a big encourager of like, hey, first of all, let's focus on building a company that can replace the current income that you're making at your company. Next, let's build this into $1, $2, $3 million company where you can, if you're the sole owner, or if you're managing with someone else, you can completely change your life with just having a business that runs at $3-4 million a year. But I don't know if you were in the cohort where a VC investor stood up and basically said, we would rather see your company fail than stay at $20 million a year.
Yeah, $20 million is a lot. I wasn't there, but like this heard these kind of conversations. Yeah.
And so that's because they'd rather write it off, right, than to have you stagnate at 20 million a year, which is insane if you think about it in terms of the ambitions that the average entrepreneur has in terms of building a business, of usually let's not beat around the bush, being a millionaire. Like you can be a millionaire without having to. You can literally run your own company and pay yourself $500,000 a year for 20 years. And I love what you said about like small business, because the bottom line is that every single business is a tech business right now, or there's a software component that you have to build or leverage someone else's. So I think that now there's this kind of like, there's this real like SMB, small, medium enterprises, and small, medium businesses, SME and SMB, basically is directly connected to what we used to define as a tech startup, right?
It is, yeah, 100%. It's all intertwined, and it doesn't have to be the VC path, but I think people think that that's the only path in entrepreneurship. And I mean, we ended up raising equity crowdfunding for our first round, and that I had an amazing experience with that.
That's so cool. That is so cool.
We'll see how that unfolds, but yeah.
There's going to be so many new investment vehicles as well coming up. We're already having discussions within the context of NoCode of like, well, if NoCode is like, is this thing where you don't need that much outside capital, but sometimes you want outside capital to be able to grow quicker. There's definitely just this idea of, okay, well, how can we give liquidity to these, financial vehicles, basically? Because in the end of the day, investors want to see money back, right?
They do.
And so in the tech world with VCs, it's like the exit, and you make a multiple on your on the investment that was made. But there are other mechanisms in which you can see liquidity and get paid for that investment that you've made. And
yeah, there's so many different models out there. I think it really kind of came to light for me when I was listening to kind of a VC talk, and they said, we only invest in things that can return our entire fund. So think about it. If you have $100 million fund as a VC, and you own 10% of somebody's company, that company has to be $1 billion company in order to get that return of $100 million. So that's why it's kind of, go for the swing for the fences companies, knowing that one of them hopefully will return the entire fund. And that's just the way that, the structure is set up. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just that not all businesses, as you said, need to be $1 billion company, or that it might not even fill the founder's goals if the goal is to kind of earn $500,000 a year and just have your own business and have that be satisfying,
or to sell for 10 million.
Or to sell for 10 million, that's equally there's nothing.
I think there's a big responsibility for us to educate people about this. So one of the big things that I pride myself is basically teaching people these different paths, and not saying, hey, you shouldn't raise VC funding, but just have them understand the implications of what these different things, whether it's VC investment, raising capital from sort of angel investors, bootstrapping, grants, crowdsourcing or crowdfunding. There's a lot of different mechanisms out there, and people just have to be informed so that they can make a decision that's in line with what they want.
Yeah,
and I think that's the most important thing.
Normal, and also just not some people are like, I'm an entrepreneur, therefore I VC, therefore because that feels like it's the only path and it's connected to your identity then, but it doesn't have to be,
I love that. And I think we've moved into this new era now where it's like the pride comes from like who has raised the least money and built the largest company.
Yeah,
I hope that's the new show off metric, right?
I love
that. And you look at companies like Zapier, they raised $1.3 million. They raised one round, and they're one of the fastest growing companies out there.
I have a friend who did a round of 700,000 and then they've reached profitability.
Yeah, I'm actually going to be talking to Jason from Indie VC and them and Earnest Capital, and there's this whole other aspect of people who are basically saying the narrative behind it is we want to write your last check. We want to help you grow. We invest in more mature companies, but hey, everyone's kind of investing in companies that are a little bit more mature at this point. And I like that idea, and so they came out with this great, they had this thing when they came out, and it was like basically like a unicorn mask that was like burning, and it was like down with the unicorn, like, this is a revolution against that culture of like, let's all build unicorns. And I find it really interesting. I think that it's you have a lot of, I wish I had heard that kind of narrative 15 years ago when I started my first startup.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, the landscape's changing, I think for the better from a mental health perspective too. And burnout.
So let's take 3 steps back. Let's have a bird's eye view. You've been in so many different roles. You've had experience in so many different realms. But if you step away from your company for a second, like what is some of the influence that you want to have in the world? Because I think that, that's a really big question. I know it's a very loaded question, and you can maybe just answer with some of the things that come to mind. But like, what's the influence that you would like to have? Because, one day we're all going to be leaving this place. And I think there's definitely, I think about this personally a lot, right? It's like, what is the influence I want to leave? Like, yes, I want to, make money. I want to build great businesses, but like, what's your vision for your own life?
Wow. Thanks for that question. Yeah, exactly. I'm really so excited with where I am in my career and being in education. There's something just immensely satisfying about knowing that you're helping people make a transition from one life stage, in our case, high school, into whatever that next step is. And it, may not necessarily be college. It may be kind of, straight into work. It may be, taking NoCode courses and kind of building a business straight away. But equipping people with a sense of curiosity and a sense of I can do this and a sense of confidence, I would definitely hope that the more people I could do that for, I would leave this earth a happy place, happy.
I love that. I love that. Yeah. It's really, like I'm also in education, and I think that people who are in that world, it really is about like helping people to make change, to grow, to develop better selves, better careers, and yeah, I think I love that. Oh man! So after that really heated last question, why don't you tell our audience where they can find you if they want to reach out to you, if they want to learn a little bit more about Everydae or anything else?
Absolutely. Everydae.com. Everydae is spelled with a D-A-E at the end, not a Y at the end. And yeah, we're happy, reach out anytime, Christine@everydae.com. We are happy to kind of, give subscriptions, particularly to high schoolers in need as well. So if you have any connections in the nonprofit world, then, we'd love to speak with you about that. And then, yeah, we just would love you to ace high school without the stress, which is kind of our unofficial motto. And yeah, if you know of anybody who might be interested, then do send them our way.
Well, Christine, thank you so much for representing education, the future of education, for representing female founders. I think we need much more of that moving forward. And thanks so much for joining and for sharing your know-how. I'm super excited just having looked at your past, having had the opportunity to work with you and seeing the direction that you're taking. I'm super excited. So thanks so much for joining the show, and keep doing what you're doing because it's working.
Thanks so much. You too. We're so excited to hear about what you're up to, and really excited to be on today.
Awesome. Have a great day.
Thanks.